let's talk about conditioning your opponent in Street Fighter 6. So one of the most important things you can learn in any fighting game is how to condition your opponent, and Street Fighter 6 is no different. So this video is actually going to be broken up into 3 different sections. The first is talking about universal conditioning. So these are conditioning rules that apply to every single character across every single fighting game. So if you're new to fighting games, you might want to stop there just to understand what conditioning is and why we use conditioning techniques. The second part of the video is going to be talking about something that's more advanced, and that's character specific conditioning. Because believe it or not, every single character or every different type of archetype is going to have their own conditioning strategy. So I'm going to touch on that. And then the final part of the video is going to be the most advanced section. It's fighting an opponent that's already conditioned themselves to do bad habits. So if you like this type of content and you find that it helped you out, like, comment, subscribe, and let's get into it. So the reason conditioning is so important is because it influences behaviors and it just exploits patterns that your opponent might be getting used to. So in Street Fighter 6, here are some common universal tips that are going to work for every character. So one common way to condition your opponent in Street Fighter 6 is going for things like repeated throws. Like every time you knock your opponent down, you just keep throwing them just to get in their head. Eventually, you're going to throw them enough times that they're going to say, you know what, I'm going to want to fight back on this. I don't want to get thrown to death. And you get hit by a shimmy. And then now you're saying, oh man, what the heck just happened? Unfortunately, you got conditioned into trying to attack the grab because this is all you expected your opponent to do because that's all they were hitting you with. So another example of what people do is they'll do a pattern over and over. So they'll hit you with 3 block strings like that, and at the end of the block string they'll delay and hit you with a low. And this is so common, but people will do this over and over, maybe 10 times in a row. And finally you tell yourself, hey, this is what they're always going to do. I'm going to crouch in this situation. And unfortunately, you may have just walked into their conditioning trap because instead of going for a low, they go for an overhead now because they've been showing you crouch medium kick for so long that that's just what your brain is going to be programmed to do. And now you're open for the overhead. Another very common way that people condition in this game is after a throw or on your wake up, they're going to do a drive rush normal. And then they're going to be plus. And you're going to see them do this 3 times in a row, 4 times in a row, 5 times. They're just going to keep doing it. Eventually, you're going to tell yourself that, hey, I want to fight back to this because I don't want to keep eating this pressure. You're going to do a wake-up Shoryuken, and then you fall for their trap. They conditioned you to block that for so long that now that you want to do something about it, they know that now they can switch it up and bait you. This is what you need to remember when you're playing a new fighting game or you're just learning conditioning for the first time. The number one thing you have to remember is just creating a pattern that gets your opponent comfortable thinking that they know the solution, and as soon as they want to execute on that plan, you pull the rug from underneath them and you switch it up. That's conditioning 101. Alright, so section number 2, very important. It talks about character specific and character archetype specific conditioning. So there's no better character archetype to start off than with grapplers, and essentially we've all been there. If you're fighting a grappler, the one thing you just want to avoid at all costs is this. No one wants to get hit by their SPD. It's tons of damage. They get Oki after it. We want to avoid it at all costs. So one of the most common ways that people want to get out of that situation is when your opponent goes for an SPD, they jump. And you know what? If your opponent goes for the SPD and you jump out, you win that interaction and life goes on and everything is peachy. But we know this is a conditioning video and things don't always work out the way that they should against these guys. So in Street Fighter 6, if I set my opponent to jump on wake up, jumps do not activate on frame 1. That means if your opponent knocks you down and then does a meaty attack and you try to jump, you're going to get hit because you're not blocking and the game will take you as someone that's in pre-jump frames. So if you're playing against a grappler that actually knows what they're doing, you're going to be in a world of hurt if you try to jump out of every interaction. And that's why this is the number one way that grappling players condition their opponents. Oftentimes, you'll see players that are great with grappling characters not go for the big, heavy SPD damage. They'll go for these bread and butter combos over and over because they know that the opponent is holding up. But the second reason they do it is because eventually, this is going to condition their opponent to no longer hold up on wake up. And what that means is, they'll be on the ground, so if they do have to go for an SPD, they're going to be able to land it. Even take a character like a Manon. If you watch a high-level Manon player like IDOM or you run into one in Battle Hub, they are so comfortable going an entire round, entire set without even doing her SPD. They'll build her metals different ways, but the number one thing they're doing is they're getting consistent damage with some of her other combos, and when the opponent finally gets comfortable not trying to avoid the SPD, they get hit by a ton of them back to back to back. So conditioning goes through all grappling characters the same way. You just have to make your opponent get comfortable staying on the ground. The next one I'll touch on is if you play a character that has Fireball or a zoning character, your number one goal to condition your opponent, outside of universal things like faking high lows and things like that, is to throw tons of fireballs so they get comfortable with fireball spam being on the screen. I'm going to tell you why this is important. It's important because one of the most important things about a zoning character's game plan is being able to consistently anti-air your opponent. Not only do anti-airs do decent damage, they lead into other things like more pressure on wake up and whatnot, but if you never throw fireball like at all during a match, or you don't use them a lot, there's going to be no reason for your opponent to jump, and they're simply going to choose to not jump, and they're just going to keep all the interactions on the ground. And that's a problem, because if your opponent never jumps, or you never give them the idea to jump, they'll never fall for simple things like fireball traps like this, which are a big part of zoning characters' game plan, especially characters like Shotos. You have to make them think that, you know, this might be the time that they throw a fireball and they jump, but it's really you that's in the driver's seat. The same thing applies if you play like a tricky character like Ed. If there's something in his kit that's extremely annoying, like you always do this wake up tether, keep doing it to your opponent. Eventually they're going to get annoyed with always being -4 on wake up like this. They might want to be in a situation where they're going to say, you know what, this time I'm going to wake up and parry, and what does that do? He dashes in and grabs them. But this type of conditioning can only be possible if you use this tether a lot on their wake up. So you have to know the character that you're using and what's in their kit, and slowly build up that pattern, because it's only specific to this specific character in this situation. So only Ed can do this, and that's why you got to know what your character is capable of. So the last tip is actually about advanced conditioning. I actually find this one to be the most satisfying, but it's also the hardest. So the advanced conditioning is abusing or exploiting the bad habits your opponent already has. So in other words, they've already conditioned themselves over thousands of matches to fight a certain way, and you have to exploit that at the right time, and this is what I mean. Alright, so a very common annoying spacing pressure tool that a lot of Terries use is they space out this target combo in the corner to be perfectly spaced, or very few normals in the game will be able to punish it. So I was doing this to my opponent who picked Luke, and every single time I did this, he would do crouch medium punch. And as you can see, it doesn't land because I spaced it at a certain distance, but I let Luke do this over and over. Even if I had to block it, I wanted him to know that I want you to keep on doing this. Because I waited until round 3 when I had all of my meter fully stocked to say, hey, he's been pushing this crouch medium punch every single time, that I'm just going to be able to condition them to go into a combo like this. And I would go into my level 3 and do 6,000 plus damage. But this is one of the situations where I was able to identify that my opponent has conditioned themselves to always try to punish or take their turn back with a crouch medium punch, and I kept that in the memory bank until I had enough meter to really make them pay. You have to decide when's the best time to execute that plan. And this is another example that used to happen to me. I was playing this opponent that picked Ryu. Every single time, I kid you not, 10 times out of 10, when I teched a throw, they would throw a fireball right after. So instead of punishing them right away, I waited until a critical point in the match when I had enough resources to kill. When this opportunity came, what did I do? I jumped over and then hit them with a devastating combo. And this is something that this opponent has probably been doing for hundreds of matches, but I let them keep that conditioning going during our set, and I chose when I wanted to take that risk to deliver that big damage or that big swing in my favor. So look out for these types of habits. So that's the video. Hope you found it useful. I just want people to know when it comes to conditioning, there's so many different ways that you can condition your opponent, but the number one thing you got to do is understand some type of pattern recognition. If you can do that for yourself or your opponent, you're going to put yourself in a way better odd to pick up these moments in the future. Keep that in mind, keep playing, condition your opponents, and get those W's. Peace out, everybody.